So welcome to our February brown bag on economic justice. In terms of tech, if you have any questions, you can always type in the chat box. And ultimately, if you have questions for Kim, our presenter, definitely type them there. We'll keep an eye on the chat box. If you want to type a message to everybody so everybody will see that, please select all panelists and attendees on the drop-down chat box. Otherwise, your comment just is shared with panelists. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Christopher to introduce Kim, who is our speaker for today.
All right, and for some reason, Brandy, I'm not able to turn my video on, but this is Lindsay Christopher, the Housing Program Manager, and I am here to, oh, here we go. There we go. Thank you, Brandy. I am here to introduce our guest speaker today, our guest presenter, Kim Pentico from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. She is the Director of Economic Justice at the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and she's going to give us a fantastic overview of all things economic justice under that big umbrella term and get us really excited to dig deeper into our EJ work here in Colorado and give us some ideas. Thank you so much for being with us, Kim.
Thanks, Lindsay and Brandy. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks for those of you who took time out of your day to join. I know y'all are terribly busy and you got lots on your plate. So I know, particularly talking about something like economic justice, it feels like you got one more thing you want me to do. And so I get it. I actually came from a local program years ago, and I have some sense of what that is like, and that already asks so much of you. But part of what I want to do today is sort of unpack what I think you already know, which is you're doing economic justice on some level. You're doing really important economic justice work on, and just sort of connect some dots for you, and hopefully give you a little more in your tool bag when you are doing this work in your community and with survivors as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see a PowerPoint now. If not, I suppose somebody will pipe up and let me know. So thanks again for letting me join you for this important series that y'all are doing. I'm so excited to be here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intersections of EJ and domestic violence work. We're going to talk about public policy and what that looks like, touch briefly on living wage, macro versus micro advocacy, and then finish off with some financial self-care, all in about 55 minutes. So it should be fantastic. So, you know, just to reiterate again, what I think you all already know is that 1/3 of all women will experience some form of domestic violence in their adult lives, versus 60% of women who are living in poverty. So we see a much higher rate of IPV for folks who are living in poverty. Of those, anywhere from 8 to 33% report recent or current violence, and a very high prevalence of childhood physical and sexual abuse, as well as 99% of survivors of domestic violence report experiencing some form of financial abuse. So it's though important to make sure that folks are very clear that what we're not saying, or I'm definitely not saying, is that those living in poverty are more violent. Absolutely not saying that. And it does not mean that those with plenty of financial resources are not experiencing or at risk of experiencing abuse. But what we do know is that having limited financial resources is a huge risk factor for domestic violence. We know that fewer resources equals fewer good choices for getting and staying safe. So it makes sense. It makes sense that if what I need to stay safe requires access to money, and I don't have access to money, then my safety is increased. My risk at that violence is increased significantly. You know, I think about, you know, I live a very middle class life in many ways, and if I had a partner who became violent towards me and I felt unsafe in my home, I would get into my gassed up car. I would, you know, use a credit card that I had access to that had room on it, and I would go get a hotel across a town. I could potentially drive 2 or 3 hours and stay in a hotel or stay with friends who, statistically speaking, are of similar means, right? And then my partner begs me to come home. That negotiation looks very different than if I'm living in my car with my kids on the side of a street, right? So I am, again, not saying that money or poverty causes domestic violence in any way, but it certainly does limit my ability to get and stay safe. It's also important to understand that abuser often can gain more control due to the increased vulnerability that poverty does cause, and that abuse is likely to last longer and result in more severe injury when folks are living in poverty. So when we talk about what is financial abuse, and again, you all see this every day on the front line. So stealing money from the survivor and or the family, or forcing them to give access to money or financial accounts, making all household decisions or financial decisions without consulting their partner, overusing credit cards or lines of credit, obtaining or preventing from obtaining or using credit cards, refusing to pay bills or help support the family. Also just withholding physical resources such as food, clothing, medication. I worked with a survivor who he would dole out her really important medication to her and force her to do certain things to be able to get her meds. So we know how this is playing out for many survivors. We also know that it happens in in other ways. I worked with a survivor who had been turned into collections because her partner had convinced her to get she needed a new cell phone. He convinced her to take one out on a 2-year lease. And within the first fight they got, he smashed the phone. So she had to quickly decide to go get a new phone and stop paying on the other one. She couldn't afford two. So she quickly got a brand new phone, quit paying on the other one. It got turned into collections. 2 years later, that charge of collections is what kept her from being able to get safe, affordable housing. So that ripple effect to law enforcement, they just see, oh, smashed phone, it's not a big deal. But that smashed phone actually kept her from seeking her own housing. So what seems small to the outside can really have a significant impact on survivors. So what are some other examples of that intersection of economics and IPV? Can anybody type in the chat? I'm gonna pull my chat up here and see if you have any other places you've seen it. If you wanna share with us examples with survivors that you've seen, please put it in the chat section here, how you see it play out. Literally stealing money from wallets to charging up credit cards, signing over or signing property, things like that. Don't all go at once. I'm sure y'all see it. So spending rent check, oh yeah. Spending money or saying I paid the utility bill and didn't, things like that. Selling property once the victim had left the home. I refusing to pay for childcare, showing up drunk. If they're childcare and they show up drunk, then they can't go to job. That's a great example. Withholding stimulus checks, yes. Draining the accounts, opening credit cards to partners' names, maxing them out. I think we see they put everything in the survivor's name, or they put nothing in the survivor's name, right? One of the two. Convinced the survivor to cash a check, then perp knew was fake. Ooh, but the survivor did not. The survivor had to pay the bank back. Oh, she's with interest for years. What a setup. Yes. Withholding money for things kiddos need as a form of coercion and control. Absolutely. So yes, you all are seeing it. So, I mean, statistically, we say it happens with 99% of all survivors. I can't imagine you could work with a single person and not find some form of financial abuse, right? Because it's not always just stealing money out of your wallet. It's that sort of insidious other kinds of behavior, not allowing the victim to put a name on their lease or cars and help build or establish credit, or have her access to any of those things when she leaves and claim that they're hers, right? So that's another big example. Okay, so you all know it. You're seeing it all the time. So the other intersections that sometimes I think we don't often pay attention to, or is not obvious to the rest of the world, is things like employment. So forbidding her from working, harassing them at work or during work, sabotaging them so they can't attend work, causing physical harm, blacking an eye, keeping them up all night, disrupting transportation or childcare, so showing up drunk so that she can't in good conscience leave her children with somebody who is drunk. Education, often same issues as employment, causing or forcing a felony so she can't even qualify for federal aid, unable to access those student loans and things like that, or stealing or misusing student loan money that she then can get in trouble for. Housing, ruining credit due to domestic violence, so unable to access new housing, stalking, harassing them at home, causing damage to property, triggering an eviction. Health, denial to access or health services, intervention and prevention. 4 out of 10 survivors report their partner tried to get them pregnant against their will. And among those, 84 of them became pregnant. So what an impact. So forcing somebody to have a child, and what a way to also keep them tied into this person who they may no longer want to be tied to. Immigration, withholding documentation and sponsorship, lying about the rules or laws of where they live. And just some other interesting findings. IWPR put this out a couple years ago, but disrupting education. 2/3 of all respondents said that their partner's behavior negatively affected their education and job training opportunities. Disrupted their ability to work, so 84% said abusive partners disrupted their ability to work. Of those, 70% said they were not able to have a job, and 53% lost a job due to domestic violence. Workplace harassment on top of it, so they may also be getting harassed in their workplace. So many survivors also experience sexual harassment or violence in their workplace from a coworker or supervisor, separate even from their abusive intimate partner. Domestic and financial abuse and damage to credit, 73% had abusers take money from them against their will, such as their paycheck, savings, or public benefits. And then, as I mentioned before, reproductive coercion. 4 out of 10 survivors said they had a partner who tried to get them pregnant, and of those, 84% became pregnant. So unwillingly had a child that they did not choose to have, and what an impact that has on many levels. So I also wanted to talk about that, how it also then ties into all the other isms that we do. You can't do violence against women work and not talk about all the other isms, all the other forms of oppression that go on: racism, sexism, classism, ableism, anti-Semitism, ageism, and heterosexism, all involved in negative prejudgment of those whose purpose is to maintain power and control. They all work to establish a defined norm. So the haves, the pros, the white men, middle upper class, sober, whatever that is, standard of rightness under which everyone else is judged. And then this is backed up with institutional and individual violence, which makes this oppression all possible. So you have a Black woman abused by a partner who's also struggling with sobriety or ableism, and you know, all of the things that come together that also then dealing with access to finances and resources. It's a lot. In North America, our defined norm is male, white, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied, youthful, and access to wealth and resources. And so many of our systems and policies are built with that lens. So when we have things like stimulus check, it was this idea of how to get and access a stimulus check was developed from a white man's heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied, access to wealth lens. So they couldn't fathom that somebody wouldn't have access to this check. They couldn't fathom that somebody had unequal access within their home because they're white dudes walking around and everything's working in their favor and created for with them and with them, you know, by them. And so, of course, then the policies that they come up with don't work for the many folks we work with that are not white, male, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied, youthful, access to wealth and all that good stuff. So those systems, those policies that are still being passed today unfairly penalize and lack of access to many of the folks that we work with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Another great resource, if you want to unpack this, the historical piece of this policy, is Race, the Power of an Illusion. This was a video that was put out decades ago by not NPR, the public broadcast system. And it's a fabulous piece, Race, the Power of an Illusion. You can watch it on IMBD. Is that what it's called? Vimeo now. I think you can do it. It's really reasonable to rent. This examines the history of institutional racism and the long-term impact, like on redlining and things like that. Who's considered to be an American based on, you know, just sort of whims and thoughts at the moment. But the part 3, which is called The House We Live In, is phenomenal, and I strongly suggest this would be a fantastic in-service if you want to do in your office or take on, but to watch this section alone and then sort of unpack how that plays out today, even for the folks that we work with. So examples of public policy, they talk about like who is white And who isn't white actually loses property, loses access. That property is how you then invest in your long-term wealth building, and how that has trickled down and impacted even today. There's a reason why there's very few Black families on my neighborhood today, and this is in part because of redlining that occurred in generations prior, and who was determined to be a citizen based on who was determined to be white and all that good stuff. So it's a great unpacking of how that all happened. So let's talk about general DV public policy just a little bit, so we kind of connect how it all comes down at a local level. So you all are probably familiar with FVO, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, passed in 1984. This is a primary federal funding stream dedicated to support emergency shelter and related assistance for victims of DV and their kids. Violence Against Women Act, FVO-What, passed in 1994. This is landmark legislation that sought to improve criminal justice and community response. Things like STOP Grant, LAV, all tied into the Violence Against Women Act, as well as VOCA. Many of us get VOCA funds. These are victims of crime. We share this with also other crime victims groups that are working on drunk driving and parents of murdered children and things like that. All you'll see accessing the VOCA funds. But specifically then when we think about economic justice policy, there's things like TANF, temporary assistance to needy family. This is a public policy that is put into place to specifically address economic justice, right? Or injustice, if you will. Well, that was the theory. We went through a very major revamp of it in 1996 and really not seen a lot done with it since then. And this was actually under the Clinton administration. But it was very penalty heavy, this reauthorization. And I think in some ways it was Democrats trying to show that they could be just as mean as Republicans at the time. But we did try to put some protections in there, which was to ensure that DV survivors were not subject to unfair penalties. So there is the family violence option, which is part of this welfare reform that was done in '96. You all should be familiar with the family violence option. This basically says that everybody who comes to apply for TANF should be screened for domestic violence and or sexual assault, if they include that, for domestic violence, and see if it has created a barrier to work. It requires they have individual assessment by a person who is trained in domestic violence. It requires that they be redetermined no less than every 6 months to still qualify for this, and it be accompanied by a DV service plan, which can and often should include a waiver from traditional work requirements. I think that lots of places are struggling to do this. I'd love to hear in the chat if folks are accessing FVO regularly in the TANF office, if folks are being waived out of traditional work requirements due to domestic violence, but that is something everybody who applies for TANF should be getting some sort of screening. If states don't meet the requirements, they can get certain credits, and so there's advantages to the states who are doing a really good job of screening for domestic violence for TANF folks. So what we've learned about FVO since we've been doing this now for 20 plus years, 25 plus years, although the first mandated step is to screen, we're seeing a lot of places aren't doing it. We're seeing screening rates as low as 1% to as high as 28%, when it should obviously be 100%. That means anybody applying for TANF should be getting some sort of domestic violence screening. Typically, it's not occurring during sanction processes. So if somebody's being sanctioned or they're losing benefits, they should always be looking for domestic violence as a possible reason why and being waived out of that sanction. Disclosure, we're hearing that they're concerned that would trigger automatic reporting to CPS. So we do know lots of survivors may be getting screened, but may not be disclosing because they're not sure what's going to happen with their children. So there's a lot that needs to be done around explaining to folks why they are asking the question, and it's not to get access to your kiddos, but rather to get them access to needed services. Another public policy is actually the Affordable Care Act, and we've seen lots of benefits to survivors because of the Affordable Care Act. This does allow survivors to continue to get access to affordable free health care. There was a time before the Affordable Care Act. That's actually what it's called, the Affordable Care Act. It does not have anybody's name, any president's name in the actual act. It is called the Affordable Care Act. It was a time when insurance companies could consider a history of domestic violence as a pre-existing condition. And it could impact their access and to healthcare, and they can no longer do that under the Affordable Care Act. It allows them that they get affordable free access to well woman visits annually, mammograms, breastfeeding supplies, HIV screening, contraceptions. In many places, teen pregnancies have dropped by over half since the Affordable Care Act has gone into place. So this is having a profound impact on all the generations. Violence Against Women Act. Also, the last round of passing a reauthorization of the FVO-What, there was housing protections that were put in. This ensures individuals are not denied assistance or evicted or have their assistance terminated due to domestic violence. It strengthened protections to enhance emergency transfers and federal housing, early lease termination, and incentives to get rid of nuisance ordinance. We were seeing, you know, the one strike you're out when it came to public housing, that if somebody, law enforcement were called on a unit, a public housing unit, that they would consider it public nuisance and they could legally evict that person. You know, then that was in part to try to reduce drug crimes and violent crimes, gang activity and things like that. But what was happening is then the survivors of domestic violence were afraid to call and ask for assistance. And so we were able to get rid of that under the last round of reauthorization. It also did increase emergency housing resources for survivors via HUD around homelessness, rapid rehousing, and there was a DV bonus funds available under the continuum of care application. As well as we saw an increase in VOCA funds, which added housing and economic justice outcomes for survivors. So specifically in VOCA now, they actually frame out EJ work within what you're eligible to do with your VOCA funds now, which is super exciting. And SNAP, and I think there's some of these places, some of these slides are from prior to the last elections, so forgive me. These are things that we were working towards that we're just all very hopeful about. I do think we'll see some movement in these areas, so I'm super excited. Certainly the new administration has indicated they are open to these things, and I think they're going big, as you have probably been seeing when it comes to assistance, that the idea is let's give everybody as much help as they need right now so we can get through this horrible time. And so I think we're going to see movement on SNAP. This is what people used to call food stamps. I'm sure you're all familiar, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Concept being anybody from 14 to 49 or 18 to 49, able-bodied without dependents, were limited to 3 months of benefits during any 36-month period. It did allow states to waive work requirements in areas with high unemployment. Currently, the average monthly benefits for adults with children, this is monthly. The average monthly benefit is $165 a month in food stamps benefits. So no one's getting rich off of these, and for most, this is their only federal benefit. So there's levels of qualifying. SNAP is one of the sort of, if you will, easiest thing, lowest threshold to qualify for. So for many folks, this is the only assistance they're getting is $165 in food stamp assistance or in SNAP assistance. So we do have some proposals out there that will tighten regulations and things like that. So we're hopeful. We're hoping that things that we need to really address is seasonal and gig work is a real challenge in having people assessed for SNAP benefits. And many current participants face serious barriers such as mental health, substance use disorders, and justice involvement. So some things to be on the just to look at, I'm just going to touch on them really briefly, is earned income tax credit. Now's the time to be thinking about this, particularly when people are filing taxes, making sure they're taking advantage of all of the public benefits that they may be eligible for, such as earned income tax credit. I also will point out, it does sound like this next round of stimulus may have something more to do with earned income tax credit than an actual check. So that's kind of the most recent talk. So it's something we're probably going to have to get a little more versed in understanding and making sure those we work with are aware of it. As well as we continue to work on things like safe and sick days. We continue to fight for them federally. This is allowing or requiring employers to give employees safe and sick days, days to take care of their children if they're hourly employed, if they need to go file a protection order, that they don't lose their job to go get a protection order, things like that. That mandates those who don't typically have great benefit plans to actually require that people be allowed to access safe and sick days. So I'm hopeful we'll see some movement on there, as well as unemployment insurance. Some states actually do allow for you to file for unemployment if you lose your job due to domestic violence and or sexual assault. So we are pushing for federal guidance on this and for federal unemployment be required. So we'll see where that goes. Again, we have probably one of the friendlier administrations we've had in a while to be looking at things like this. And course debt, and this is a toughie, but this is something we will continue to look at in the next couple of years. But this is helping survivors of domestic violence who have been put into debt due to coercion. Their abusive partner made them take out debt under their name, or they forced them to sign over something, or they didn't even know it was taken out in their name. But now they have this line of debt. So helping them fight that. This is a big challenge. We've actually had a few states that have passed coerced debt relief. The challenge is that when we do this particular thing by state, much of the debt crosses state lines. So it's not hugely helpful. It is a step, though, in the right direction. So we will continue to work for that. The challenge, obviously, is that we're up against a very powerful lobby, banks and creditors, Visa, MasterCard, all those folks. And so we're definitely the little guy in this fight, but it is something we continue to bring up and let folks know about. So just to also, again, I think that this is not something you're not already aware of, but I think it's a good tool to have in your tool belt as we start talking about this more. And I think we're going to start talking about more and more. As many of you are probably aware, this administration is pushing for a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is up from $7.25 is the current minimum wage. I know there in Colorado, you're $12 an hour, which is great. You are much closer. I live in Kansas. We're still at $7.25. And so for those of you who are not aware, even at $12 an hour, and y'all are doing much better in Colorado than many states, $12 an hour is about $480 a week. Before deductions, it's a little over $2,000 a month. If you have two kids, a boy and a girl, 8 and 10 years old, fair market rent on a 1-bedroom is a little over $1,000. This is across Colorado, so obviously we know in some places it's going to be higher, in other places it's going to be lower, but on average, this is a Colorado average. And I'll show you where you can actually pull up the information specific to your county or city. 2-bedroom fair market value is a little over $1,300, and you have a 3-bedroom, which is a little over almost $1,900, a little over $1,900, which is pretty much your entire paycheck. And really, since your paycheck was before deductions, you'll be lucky to get even a 3-bedroom out of your entire paycheck, even at $12 an hour. So it is a good reminder that we should never confuse minimum wage with living wage. Minimum wage is simply the least amount someone can legally pay you, and it is in no way connected to what it actually costs to live. So it's a good reminder to folks as these conversations continue to happen, because the reality is that if I want to have a 1-bedroom, I need to make closer to $44,000 a year in Colorado on average, or I need to work 71 hours a week at minimum wage in Colorado at $12 an hour. And this is based on what the feds consider to be reasonable cost of your housing, that you should not be paying more than 1/3 of your income towards housing. If I want a 2-bedroom, I need to be making at least $55,000 a year, or I need to work 88 hours at minimum wage. And if I'm just crazy enough to think I should have a 3-bedroom apartment for me and my 2 kids who are 8 and 10, I need to make $76,000 a year, or I need to work 123 hours a week at minimum wage, which I don't think is even humanly possible. This is really helpful when people say, why does she leave? Why does she leave? This is a great example. She can't afford to leave. She can't afford to not be battered. She can't afford to not be brutalized in front of her kids. She literally can't afford it. So this is a good place to go to remind folks of what this really looks like when we want to do victim blaming, things like asking, why doesn't she leave? And again, a reminder that minimum wage is little under $25,000 a year, and that's before taxes or any deductions. You can get all this information at the Low Income Housing Coalition, and I'll show you at the end. If we have time, we'll go to their website and I'll let you poke around a little bit there. But again, a good tool to use if you ever want to help somebody understand what that looks like. So now we're going to talk a little bit about macro versus micro advocacy and how you all are probably already doing a lot of this at a local level. You're doing both macro and micro advocacy on these things, like potentially joining living wage campaigns, which is a form of macro advocacy. So joining other low-wage organizers, food service, hospitality workers, huge in many areas in Colorado, I think, with the skiing and the vacation groups that you have. Partnering with them. Childcare staff is another group that is good to partner with. Home and healthcare employees. You don't have to do this work alone. There's other folks that are already doing this. Partner with them. When this is a great example of high tides raise all ships. You know, that if we can all push our effort into one area and really push this issue out and say, well, this matters to us too, then our efforts are amplified. Housing, there's a push to do National Housing Trust Fund, another form of macro advocacy. This is the first new housing resource since 1974, targeted to building, rehabilitating, preserving, and operating rental housing for extremely low-income people. So this would be money set aside for a trust fund that's all it can be used for. You know, they can't pull money out for something else that's come up. So we're really pushing a National Housing Trust Fund. We have many communities that have local housing trust funds that can just boost housing in local communities. But partnering with public housing authorities and COC and balance of state application, landlords association, go talk to your landlord association, your community, and talk to them about what it looks like when survivors show up. You know, why many survivors have sketchy rental histories and why that might be, and why sometimes they just need a second chance. But that's a great example of micro advocacy. Partnering with your disabilities or ability rights groups to do macro advocacy. Talk to the folks who are doing physical, mental, aging, HIV access. See what you can do to partner around what's going on in your community and change things at a local or state level even. Law enforcement and courts. I think that we saw a huge push around this summer. I think that lots of folks' eyes got woke to how the system often doesn't work and hasn't worked for a very long time, if ever, for communities of color, and why things like stacking charges is really detrimental to many communities of color. You know, you don't get just pulled over for speeding, you get pulled over for a tail light, you get pulled over for pulling over wrong, you know, all the things, and that they stack multiple charges so they get somebody to then, because you're now facing 5 charges instead of 1, then you're likely to plea and you're in the system forever. We've long known you're far better off to be rich, white, and guilty than poor, black, and innocent. And so this is a real push to have some real conversations about what this looks like and how it does impact survivors even that we work with. And credit counseling. So find out who's doing credit counseling in your community, and are they screening for domestic violence and IPV? This is a great place to potentially partner. These are folks that are already doing credit counseling in your community. See if you can't go train on how survivors show up, what that looks like, how to ask questions about if this is an issue for them, and then maybe see if they would commit to volunteering and doing some work for the survivors you work with on helping them do credit counseling. So, and lastly, I want to end with talking about personal advocacy, and for me, this is huge. This is near and dear to my heart. I think I'm assuming the vast majority of us are women, not all, but vast majority of us doing this work are women, and that particularly to the women who are doing this work, taking care of our own finances is one of the most badass things we can do for ourselves and for the generations to come. I think that because many of us do this work because we care and because, you know, it's meaningful to us, then we think that money then, because we don't make good money, because we're poorly paid and poorly compensated, but we're doing work that we love, then we don't have to, we can just sort of say money's not important to us, right? And I'm just gonna call bullshit and say, no, money's not important, but we should not have to struggle. We don't get any points for doing anti-poverty work but living in poverty, right? We get to fight for our own financial freedom and our own financial you know, that we don't have to struggle all the time. That it's okay to fight for our own financial comfort and not feel bad about that. So are you taking care of your own financial house? You know, are you budgeting? Are you managing your credit? Do you know what you need to know to do those things? Are you being your own financial badass and taking control of those things? So pay yourself first. How we spend our money is an indication of what we value. So when we pay attention to where and how we're spending our money, when we are trying to really shore up those loose ends and finding our spending leaks, it allows us to then put our money behind people and things we care about. If we care about the economy, if we care about women-owned businesses, if we care about, green or eco-friendly things, when we have more money loosened up to do that, then we can put our money behind the things we care about. And so there's real power there. So this matters because on average, women live 5 years longer. Women are more likely to outlive male partners. We have earning potential is less. Women's pay tends to plateau at age 39 versus men's tends to plateau at 48. Women tend to put on investing for long-term due to immediate family financial needs. So I really encourage you, because the tables are already stacked against us, to take control of your own personal finances. Start tracking your spending. Make saving automatic. Don't wait and don't skip. Make it important because you're important, because the women in your circle are important, because you want them to do it for themselves. You should do it for yourself as well. Get a side hustle if you can. Dedicate those funds to your retirement or to self-care or whatever that looks like. Create an annual and multi-year plan and allow yourself to see the big picture. I would encourage you, if you're currently renting and you think you're going to be locality-wise where you're going to be for a while, to remember you are paying a mortgage. It's just whose mortgage are you paying? Are you paying yours or are you paying your landlord's mortgage? Most of the time, folks who rent, when they look into purchasing, will find that they can actually buy property for less monthly payment than they're currently paying in rent. And the beauty of purchasing, many things are amazing about that. Number one, you build wealth. Right? You actually start investing in something that in the end you have accumulated something that has value behind it. Whereas rent, you will have no value at the end of 5 or 7 years of renting, versus 5 or 7 years of paying a mortgage, you have equity then built up in something. Additionally, particularly for women, but particularly for women of color, to purchase a home or property is really pushing against all the things that have been pushed against you. The entire communities were locked out of property ownership. And when we can flip that and own property and build wealth, we are pushing against all the things that pushed against us. So it is one of those ways that really encourage you to think about investing if at all possible. Simple things like know your credit score. You should not be the last to know your credit score. You should not show up and ask somebody else to lend you money and not know how they see you. And part of the way they see you is by your credit score. So make sure you understand and know your credit score. Pay attention to market news. Don't panic. When you do investments, whether that be through your workplace or privately or whatever, pay attention to market news. Invest in things and people that you believe in. Now's a great time to maybe even buy individual stocks. I do this with my kids, actually. We sit down every once in a while and talk about what are companies that are really doing some cool stuff that we want to support. When the whole stupid thing about bathroom bans were going around, and Target stepped up and said, we're not playing that stupid gender game and questioning people about how they identify, we invested in Target stock. Different companies that we believe in, we've just decided to buy some individual stocks here and there, and it's been a lot of fun as a family. And find a trusted advisor. So you may have to pay for that. You may have to pay somebody a couple $100 to give you advice that they can't benefit from. So you can get advice from somebody that's free. Just keep in mind, it's not always bad, but if the advice is free, then they're only going to actually probably give you advice on what they sell, so they make money on what you end up buying. Versus if you pay somebody a flat fee, $100, $200, their menu from what they can offer you or advise you on is much wider because they've already been paid and they're not going to make money off of what they're offering. And ask things like, are you a fiduciary? And actually, during the Obama administration, they created a law that anybody that was giving financial advice had to be acting as a fiduciary, which means that they had to give you the advice that was best for you. The last administration rolled that back and said that you don't have to be a fiduciary. You only have to give them advice that's not terrible, basically. If you benefit from the advice you give them, then so be it. So it's no longer required that those who are giving financial advice be a fiduciary, be acting as a fiduciary. But it doesn't mean you can't ask. And you can always say, are you acting as a fiduciary? And they have to answer yes or no. And if they're acting as a fiduciary, that's what you want to hear. Some other things you can do: start an investment club, pool money, share research responsibility, reduce your trading costs. Buying individual stock is about $10 commission. You have 20 members buying versus on their own versus 20 members contributing $10 each. So something to think about. Research investment clubs in your community. You can start a research club or start an investment club, but this is a really neat way to, maybe the book clubs aren't for you, maybe an investment club is. But there's lots of good tools out there. Consider monthly contribution. There's great written agreements that are legally binding that can help protect everybody involved if that's a path you go down. Some other places to think about that your money matters. So there's things like Progressive Shopper, where you can find out if you are supporting a brand that aligns with your values. You can do mindful marketing, which allows you to shop your values. So maybe you want to make sure that you are shopping for biodegradable or cruelty-free or fair trade. But there's some great resources out there that help you put your money behind your values. And you can also go to the NNEDV shop, and I'll show you what that is at the end, and you can really shop your values there. And then lastly, don't be afraid. There's lots of good information out there. Kiplinger Smart Money for women is plain English advice, lots of really good podcasts. Barbara Stanny, who wrote Prince Charming Isn't Coming, and lots of other good books. And Stacey Teasdale, who does lots of great stuff from Black women in investing and home ownership. All of these I would recommend. Oh, and this is the last slide. This is my kiddos. This is why I do this work. This is McKenna and Maddox. I'm gonna do my best not to get teary. McKenna's graduating this year. She's a senior. How'd that happen? My son Maddox is a sophomore. This is why I do this. Sorry. I do this because I know that the work I do doesn't guarantee their safety. And if for whatever reason they can't come to me, I want them to come to you. And if they don't show up sober or clean or making decisions that you approve of or get, please don't forget they're my kids. And they're my McKenna and they're my Maddox, and they're not perfect and they're gonna make mistakes. But I'm so glad that you're out there to answer the door if for whatever reason they can't come to me. So with that, I know that work that you do is thankless. I know your hours are long and your days are hard. But on behalf of NNEDV, thanks for all you do. And I hope that you've been able to take something out of this. I am grateful that you've let me spend an hour with you today. So with that, sorry. She's a senior. It's been a tough year. Anyway, any questions? I know I went super, super crazy fast. Let me turn this off for a second and then we can do video. Sorry, guys. Any questions? Again, I know I went really fast. Let me see if I can't get on to, let me see if I can back up here and see if I can't show you the NNEDV website. Here is, I'm gonna share this with you. So here's the NNEDV shop website if you want to go shopping for that hard to buy for a feminist. We've got some pop sockets that say peace, love, and safety. We've got t-shirts that say this is what an advocate looks like. We've got bags that say another day, another 78 cents. Mugs that say smashing the patriarchy, but first coffee. Feminism, making it look good since 1948. We've got some cool t-shirts, Sojourner, Gloria, Susan, RBG, Belle, and me, coasters. Leaning the F in mugs. And then we've got cool pillows that say do me respectfully, and onesies that say smashing the patriarchy one diaper at a time. So this is how this is our NNEDV side hustle, right? Everybody's got to have one. Any questions? Sorry, didn't mean to get all emotional. Brandy or Lindsay, is there anything you need or any questions that
I
came
was just
along?
going to say thank you so much. I'm glad I was checking in the chat, and it looks like everybody's really grateful for, you know, for your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom. Are you going to be able to share the slides? I'm sure that question might come up at some point.
Yep, I will send you the packet as soon as we're all done.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any actual questions, but folks can definitely still keep typing in if they have any. Lindsay, did you have any thoughts or questions?
I was just going to add that given all of the information that Kim shared, if y'all have questions, we are still building our economic justice program out here at the coalition, but we are here to support you in deepening your skills, deepening your capacities. I'll go ahead and type my email and Chance LeBeau's email into the chat box so that you're able to reach out to anyone from the housing program should you need assistance implementing this or have questions. What does this look like in your org? And if you need us to reach out on your behalf to Kim, we're happy to do that if we need some guidance as well.
And I'd be happy. Right now I'm doing for the Massachusetts Coalition a small group of, like, we just wrapped up. I think there was 7 advocates total. We just did advocate self-care, financial self-care for 4 rounds. We met for an hour over 4 weeks, and we just went through financial self-care. I'd be happy to do, if anybody wants to do that or whatever you need from me, I'm here for you.
That sounds amazing, Kim, and I'm so glad that you were able to, you know, really emphasize advocates taking care of themselves, because I think it's so overlooked. And I'm so, you know, definitely seeing things in the chat that folks are really grateful for that as well. Lindsay, you probably want to make that, just change your direction for those emails so everybody can see them. And looks like we have a comment about wanting to watch it again and take more notes, and absolutely. So we'll send out a recording to everyone, just so you know. Everybody who's registered, we'll send out the slides in a PDF form, and we'll send out the recording so you can, you know, go through things, see if you have questions. Feel free to reach out to Lindsay, feel free to reach out to Kim, whatever's needed. And I will do a little plug. Next month, we are going to do our brown bag webinar. That will be working around brain injuries and some how-tos for advocates to help support survivors with brain injuries. So that'll be March 9th, so be on the lookout for that. Just gonna put that question out there, if you have any questions for Kim or for Lindsay, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, we might wrap up a few minutes early. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, but again, Kim, thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your vulnerability and your family with us. That was so wonderful.
Oh, thank you all. Thanks for the work you do. I appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and we'll go ahead and end the webinar just a little bit early. Be on the lookout for things that, you know, good tools and resources from this webinar. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you, Kim.
Take care.